Good morning. Welcome to the second video session for Food Technology 1 FOT 150S. My name is Vusim Shaisa and today we're going to be talking about the composition and nutritional value of foods. This lecture presentation is a continuation of what we have already covered in class. We have spoken about carbohydrates and proteins as part of food constituents. This presentation will focus mostly on the lipids and will also look at the toxicants that can be found in food products. The term lipid is generally defined as the heterogeneous group of substances associated with living systems, which have a common property of insolubility in water but solubility in nonpolar solvents such as hydrocarbons or alcohols. So we know that fats, oils are insoluble in water. That's why people normally say water and oil do not mix. Edible fats and oils come both from plant and animal sources and have an impact on functional and nutritional properties of foods. I think this is what is more important that we highlight. It has both functional and nutritional impact, right? So the major members of this class, which is called the lipids, are the fats and oils. But within this umbrella of lipids, we also have other members such as the waxes, phospholipids, sphingolipids, and the sterols. The primary functions of lipids or fats and oils is to act as a source of energy reserve, especially in the adipose tissue. Certain components of fats are required nutrients as well as the carriers of fat-soluble vitamins. So in other words, they also aid in the absorption of these fat-soluble vitamins. Fats provide a feeling of satiety and fullness when consumed, and then they also provide texture and flavor to food products. Lipids, fats or oils, their food functions include whipping properties, frying, lubricating, texture, and mouthfeel. The composition, as we've looked previously with proteins and carbohydrates, the composition in fats includes carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. However, this is far less than what we normally find in carbohydrates. Right. So how does the structure of fats look? So the fat molecules are normally made up of alcohol and an acid, which will result in an ester or an ester. So glycerol is capable of forming 3 esters with different acid components or fatty acids. In this case, if this is fatty acid 1, this is 2, this is 3, and you have your glycerol molecule here. Let's say, for example, you only have one fatty acid which is attached to a glycerol molecule. That we will call a monoglyceride. If you have 2 fatty acids attached to a glycerol molecule, that is called a diglyceride, and if it's 3 fatty acids plus 1 glycerol molecule, that is called a triglyceride. And these, ladies and gentlemen, make up what we call lipids or fats, right? So the simplest form or the building blocks of fats are the molecules which are known as fatty acids. The fatty acids differ from each other by the length of the hydrocarbon chain or tail. That means how many carbon atoms are present in a particular fatty acid. So some fatty acids, they are long chain, some of them they have short chain, and the food industry uses this principle to explore the properties of the fats. For example, we have a fatty acid which is known as a capric acid, which is CAPRYLIC. So that has got 8 carbon atoms, right? And then that is basically found in what we call coconut, in coconut. And we also have, for example, oleic acid. Oleic acid has got 18 carbon atoms. That will be a long chain or a long tail hydrocarbon. So fatty acids also differ in terms of the degree of unsaturation or the number of double bonds that can be contained. So if we look at this molecule here, this is a saturated fatty acid. It has no double bond, right? And if you look at the structure here, in this chain, there are no double bonds. But if we look at the monounsaturated, we have one double bond that is present. So we know there's one double bond, and we call this a monounsaturated fatty acid. Then if we have more than one, we call the fat or the fatty acid polyunsaturated fatty acid. As we've had with proteins or amino acids, we have primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary structure. Then on carbohydrates we have sugars, then we have monosaccharides, we have disaccharides, we also have polysaccharides. In this case we've got saturated fatty acids, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. It's very important that you make this distinction. This is what you must understand, and it's very crucial for you as a food scientist to know these differences. So unsaturated fats or fatty acids are normally liquid at room temperature. These are mostly our oils. You will see in the following slides. So the less double bonds, the longer the carbon tail, and that results in higher melting point. So if you have no double bonds, or if you have got less double bonds, then your chain here increases, right? You have an increased chain, and that will result in a higher melting point. Another important thing that these fatty acid molecules differ from is the positions of the double bond. So in some cases you've got the double bond which is located on the third carbon, 1, 2, 3, right? 4, 5, 6. So this will generally be called an omega-3 amino acid. You'll do more of these in food chemistry too. So it is also important to note that fatty acids molecules differ from each other by essentiality. So we have already seen in the section about proteins that we have what we call essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids, right? So here we have what we call essential fatty acids. These cannot be synthesized by our body. They are only from plant origin, and they are usually unsaturated. So the diet must provide these essential fatty acids. So if we look at the fatty acids, saturated fatty acids. A fatty acid molecule is one of the building blocks of fat. I've already mentioned that. And the more hydrogen than carbon it has, so if you've got more hydrogen here, if you've got more hydrogen than the carbon, the more saturated your fat becomes. You see, this is surrounded by hydrogen atoms, right? So this is saturated, then it will become a solid at room temperature. And such fats, the common sources of saturated fats includes things like coconut oil, palm oil. Remember the example that I made in class, that in some cases you find, especially in winter, that your coconut oil is in a solid form, right? So this is because it is mostly made of saturated fatty acids. Things like dairy products made from whole milk, cheese and butter, beef, all these contain saturated fatty acids. So if we look at the unsaturated fatty acids now, we have, these are considered as healthier fatty acids, right? So it includes sunflower seed and corn oils. So monosaturated fats, which is mostly abundant in foods like nuts and various plant oils. This includes olive oil, canola oil, etc. comprises the majority of our intake. So if you look here, there is one double bond. So we say this is a mono unsaturated fatty acid. And this basically is where the point of unsaturation occurs. Essential polyunsaturated fatty acids contains what we normally term as essential fatty acids, and there are two types of this. We have what we call the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are mostly found in vegetable oils and most other food oils, right? As well as other various types of nuts, products such as nuts, and mostly they are found in marine products such as fish. The body requires these essential fatty acids to keep us alive and functioning properly. The same cannot be said for any other of the types of fat, including monosaturated fatty acids. So these fatty acids needs to be provided by our diet in order to sustain us, in order to keep us alive. So let us now look at the sources of these monounsaturated fatty acids, or omega or polyunsaturated fat sources. So most of the monounsaturated fat comes from sources. What is happening here? Okay, so monounsaturated fats, you'll obtain that from nuts, vegetable oils, canola oil, olive oil. Omega-3 and omega-6, which are the essential fatty acids, are normally found in soybean. Soybean has got both omega-6 and omega-3. Corn oil, safflower oil, canola oil, walnuts, flaxseed, and also fish, but not all species of fish, only trout, herring, and salmon. That is why I find that salmon is very expensive, because it contains omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Now that we know a little bit of what are the building blocks for fats and oils, and what are the sources of these fatty acids, let us look at the properties of fatty acids and their contribution to fats and oils. So fatty acids also exhibit what we call isomerism. So by isomerism we mean the molecule has the same amount of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, but it has a different arrangement of atoms, of molecules. So the way or the manner in which these molecules are arranged is different. So this results in different chemical and physical properties. An example of this, we see it in N-butyric acid and isobutyric acid. It has got the same number of amount of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen atoms. However, these within the molecules are arranged differently. Unsaturated fatty acids with double bonds can show two types of isomerism or configurations. So if they are on the same side, we call this a cis configuration, and if it's on the opposite side, we call that a trans configuration. So let us look at this. So if you have a saturated fatty acid, so look at these blue one as the hydrogen atoms, and if you look at this one as the carbon atoms, and the red as oxygen atoms. If you look at these here, these are carbon atoms, and this group, what we call, this is a carboxylic acid group. So you've seen it in the glycerol molecule over there. So if you've got an unsaturated fatty acids, and in this way you have the double bond, the hydrogen atoms are located in opposite direction, right? If they are located in opposite direction, we call this a trans configuration. But if they are on the same side, we call this as a cis configuration. I hope this is clear for you. So the second property that we know about these molecules is that short chain fatty acids, they give shorter fats of lower melting point, right? And then the longer chain fatty acids give longer fats of higher melting points. The fatty acids, they have the point of unsaturation, as I've mentioned previously. This area here is due to the absence of the hydrogen atoms at the double bonds in the fatty acids formula. So because now there's a double bond here, there is less hydrogen atoms that this molecule would have than if it were to be a saturated molecule. So it is also important that we look at the properties of the oils. So the properties of lipids in general is that they are susceptible or sensitive to oxidation, the uptake of oxygen, right? And this results in what we call rancidity. These molecules or this class of compounds also have what we call shortening properties, lubricating properties, whipping properties, and more importantly, lipids or fats and oils have a high caloric value. Generally it is said that they've got 9 calories per gram, whereas carbohydrates and proteins, they've got 4 calories per gram. This is why if in most products, when the food manufacturers want to reduce the amount of fat that is present in a product, they reduce it and then they replace the fat with a carbohydrate or a protein molecule. So the question now is, when is it a fat or an oil? So in chemistry terms, the name indicates the state of the material at room temperature. Basically, the simple classification is that a fat is a solid at room temperature and an oil is a liquid at room temperature. So this, which is soy in oil, will be classified as an oil, and this will be classified as a fat molecule. While we are there, it is also important to note that the food industry, or as scientists, we can use other chemical means to convert an oil can be converted from an oil to a fat at room temperature. And how does this occur? So firstly, there is a process which is called hydrogenation. So we know that the greater the degree of unsaturation in the fatty acid, the shorter the fat and the lower the melting point. So with considerable degree of saturation, then the fat will be a solid at room temperature. Chemically, hydrogen atoms can be added to oils and saturate the fatty acid, which will convert the oil to a solid. So when we want to convert a vegetable oil into a shortening, we use a process called hydrogenation. Basically, this process induces or inserts the chemical hydrogen atoms can be added to the oils and saturate the fatty acids. Then that results in the conversion of the oil to a fat. As I've said, this process is called hydrogenation. The oil is then converted to a vegetable oil is converted to a solid shortening. Partial hydrogenation can also be done, which results in immediate degree of solidification. So the degree of hydrogenation is important in determining the solid properties of foods containing fats, right? As I've said, we know that unsaturated fatty acids are prone to oxygen attack, or in other words, they are sensitive to oxygen at points of unsaturation. Therefore, hydrogenation, which saturates the fats now, make them more resistant to oxidation and more stable against oxidized flavor development, right? So hydrogenation saturates the fat and makes it less prone to oxidation and more stable against oxidized flavor development. It's very important to note this slide because it is a potential exam question. So I'll repeat that. Hydrogenation is a process that is used in the food industry to convert a vegetable oil into a solid shortening, and then mostly what happens is that the unsaturated fatty acids are prone to oxygen attack. In other words, they are sensitive to oxidation at points of unsaturation. Therefore, hydrogenation saturates the fat and makes it less prone to oxidation and more stable against oxidized flavor development. So now I want us to look at the other classes of compounds that are found under the umbrella of lipids, and these includes phospholipids. So phospholipids consist of a glycerol, fatty acid, phosphoric acids, and often an amino alcohol. Because of their polarity, containing both positive and negative charges at one end of the molecule and non-polarity at the other, these are very good emulsifiers that are used in the food industry in products such as chocolate. As I've said, it has polar and non-polar ends, making it ideal for an emulsifier application. For example, lecithin, which is used in egg yolks but can also be used in chocolate and salad dressings, right, to help hold the polar and non-polar components together. So before I go to the waxes, it is also important to note that phospholipids in the body, they are important constituent of cell membranes and are involved in the building of such cell membranes. The second class is what we call the waxes. The waxes are not made from glycerol. That's the only difference. They consist of a fatty acid and monohydric alcohols, which is 24 to 36 carbon atoms. Right? And in the body, they serve as a protective water repellent coatings on tissue surfaces. In the body, act as water repellent coatings and it protects the tissues. In packaging for food products, waxes are used to prevent over evaporation of moisture or invasion of the tissue with water from the environment. So it prevents moisture loss or gain. As I've said, in foods it prevents moisture loss or gain to and from the environment. And waxes are mostly used in coating your fruits such as apples, and then it will give your fruits a shiny appearance. What is also important to note about these is that waxes are not digestible. We also have the class which is called sphingomyelin. So this is a constituent of nerves and brain tissue. And the sterols contain an alcohol group and an esterified fatty acids molecule. Right. These are very complex chemical compounds containing an alcohol group, which fatty acids can be esterified, as I've said. The sterol cholesterol, right? Cholesterol is a sterol molecule, is involved in the composition of bile salts, especially in our bodies, which play a role in the emulsification of fats in the intestine. Hence, is involved in the digestion of fat molecules. We also have another molecule which is known as ergosterol. This may be converted to vitamin D in the body under the influence of UV light or sunlight. So this is the other class of lipids, right? Lipid molecule. And it's very important also to understand, and especially the waxes, because they are critically and essential in the food industry as packaging material that prevents moisture loss or gain. So the next section that now we need to talk about is, we haven't really looked at the properties of fats and oils in general. So we know that the properties of fats and oils in food, they've got sensory properties, functional or techno-functional properties, and then we've got nutritional properties. So the sensory properties includes mouthfeel, providing mouthfeel to the flavor. You know how fat products are really nice, especially if you consider products such as KFC. For those of you who consume KFC, is deep fried meat, so that also has flavor, and it could also contribute to the appearance of the product. In terms of functional, they play a role in heat transfer and in producing products such as shortening, in emulsification, whipping, lubrication, plasticity, melting point. Nutritional, as I've said, they have a high caloric value, they carry fat soluble vitamins, and they also contains essential fatty acids. Let us look at the functions of fats and oils and their examples. As I've said, nutritional, high caloric value, carries fat soluble vitamins, and then they are essential fatty acids for brain development, right? The omega-3 and the omega-6 in this case. And then in terms of sensorial properties, they've got a creamy mouthfeel, provide tenderness, flakiness, especially in pastry, right? And then flavor, especially fried foods, and they are lubricating properties. If you think about it, if you would eat bread that is not smeared with anything, whether it's peanut butter or whether it's margarine, that bread is very dry. But if you would smear it with sunshine, margarine or rama, then it's easier to consume that kind of a product. So they provide heat transfer in deep frying, especially in products such as KFC, and they are used as shortenings in biscuits, pastry, cakes and cookies, and also in bread. And then they are involved in emulsification, especially in products such as mayonnaise, whipping properties, creams, products such as Olive Whip, and then melting point cocoa butter, etc. Let us see if we can look at these individually quickly. So fats and oils require special properties. For example, butter and margarine require a plastic texture or condition that will not become hard at refrigerated temperatures and must also not melt on a summer day. And I think this is very critical, that especially if you put in your margarine in the fridge, it should not form ice crystals. It should not be really hard, but then also on the same side, you don't want it to melt on a hot summer day. For example, salad oils. A salad oil should be clear and pourable. Should be able to pour your salad oil. It should not contain molecules of high melting points which would crystallize or solidify when it's refrigerated. So you don't want crystallization to take place when you refrigerate a salad oil. If this shouldn't be the case, the products such as mayonnaise would separate due to disruption of the emulsion in the refrigerator. So let's look at what happens then to products such as chocolate and other substitutes for cocoa butter. We know that when you are consuming chocolate, it should not melt at room temperature, even if it's hot. You want your chocolate to be brittle and melt in your mouth. And then the component which gives chocolate these characteristics is cocoa butter, which melts only between 30 and 36 degrees Celsius, right? So chocolate, if you could hold chocolate in your hand, right, it should not melt, but only melt at 30 to 36 degrees. So substitutes for cocoa butter can also be used in the food industry, and these are specifically for biscuit coatings where it should not melt in your hand. As I've said, that's the coatings must have a higher melting point. See, the melting point of fat is very, very, very important property in the food industry. So for whipping and holding air, so partially solidified shortenings produce a firmer whip than liquid oils. For example, if we have butter, buttercream for cake toppings. So this basically is what I wanted to highlight regarding the third class that we've covered, which is lipids. And you can also do some more reading on the textbook by Porter and Hotchkiss, which is 1995. Norman Porter and Joseph Hotchkiss, Food Science, 5th edition. It's basically I've summarized what those authors have written about there. So the last thing that I want us to talk about is what we call natural toxicants that are found in food products. So we know that plants produce compounds that protects or helps in reproduction. Then some of these compounds could be quite toxic to us as human beings when we consume them. For example, mushrooms, they contain nitrogen containing bases and alkalides that causes severe physiological effects in human beings. Potatoes, they produce an alkaloid which is called solanine. So the consumption of large amounts of skins of potatoes that contain the substance is very toxic. So when potatoes are exposed to light and then they turn green, the levels of solanine can be as high as 100 milligrams per 100 grams. So this is a very high amount. So it is mostly concentrated under the skin of the potato, as I've said. So potato sprouts may contain even higher amounts. Then what will basically happen is that this compound will cause abdominal pain and diarrhea if it's ingested in large amounts. So this is a toxic that needs to be removed. Solanine is not lost during normal cooking, as it is insoluble in water, and it is also a heat stable substance, right? The other things are lectins or hemagglutins, which are present in kidney beans, are also toxic. We also have heavy metals such as mercury, lead, arsenic. These are found in soil and water and can be absorbed by the plant, right? So lead, we know that is used, the use of lead piping and tank in water supply can lead to higher levels of lead if the water is classified as soft water. So lead contamination of beverages is restricted to illicitly produced alcohol drinks, as also purely glazed pottery used to store acidic beverages. But these are problems that used to occur in the olden days. Currently there are systems in place, but we still need to know that these toxicants can kill people. Other toxicants are normally destroyed during heat processing, water soaking and fermentation processes. We are going to look at these in the following chapters. Usually these toxicants, they occur in small amounts that they are considered harmless, but if you consume them in high proportions, then it will therefore result in the illness. So just to summarize what we have covered today, we have looked at the last class of compounds of food constituents, which are lipids. Then we said the building blocks of the lipids are the fatty acids, and then the fatty acids, we've got the unsaturated fatty acids. We also have the polyunsaturated fatty acids, and we also have the saturated fatty acids. So the saturated fatty acids, no double bonds are present. Mono, only one double bond is present in the fatty acid chain, and then poly, if you've got more than one double bonds that are present. Then we also said in these classes, essential fatty acids are omega-3 and omega-6, which falls under the polyunsaturated fatty acids. These are very important for our diet, so the body cannot synthesize these, so the diet should provide these class of compounds. Then we also said that in the food industry there is a process which is called hydrogenation. Hydrogenation can be used to convert vegetable oils to fats at room temperature. So by inserting or by adding hydrogen molecules in unsaturated or polyunsaturated fat molecules. Then lastly, we spoke about toxicants. Important to note, solanine, which is found in potatoes, and the consumption of this will lead to abdominal pain and diarrhea. So ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. Should you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and the next session in class we will briefly discuss vitamins and minerals. However, this material is self-study, so you have to study vitamins and minerals on your own. However, in class we will take in questions. Thank you very much.